Hey guys, on this video I'm going to be talking about the third episode of The Stand. It is called Blank Page, and I'll get straight into it, so full spoilers. This is the weakest of the three episodes so far. Easily for me. I think some of the cracks that were appearing in the other two really come to the forefront here. Now, one thing that really put me off this episode, I think, was how much it jumped back and forth. Obviously, we've done that before, but they do it even more here, and it's just one of these kind of television things when something comes from a book. I guess films are guilty of it as well, but maybe more so TV, just because there's more episodes, more hours. But I think here it just you just get unnecessary bits from the past that don't really add anything in the present. It's almost like it's just something to connect things and just to like tick a box. So we get a flashback with Nadine, Joe, and with Larry on the road, and just how they actually first met, how they came upon each other. And I guess that continues on from the Larry story last week when we saw him obviously leave town and head towards Boulder. Obviously, the Heather Graham character isn't with him. We're not quite sure whether she committed suicide or if she decided not to go, or maybe if she was never really there. I think that's obviously a possibility. But yeah, just having them meet like this on the road and decide let's go to. I don't think it's needed. I think it's just sort of padding. It doesn't really add that much. Just seeing when and you get a couple of scenes of them bonding. But this episode, they definitely do jump about more because there's almost like three characters that they deal with in the episode, or like three main sort of ones. And at the start, it sets you up to think that Nadine's going to be the main focus, which makes sense because we haven't. She was introduced last week, but we only got a small bit of her. We didn't get a lot of her. But then it does jump to other characters. It is quite evenly shared out. Now, one reason for that might be the twist at the end with Nadine, which is probably going to play a big part moving forward. But yeah, I think the jumping about and just needless sort of flashbacks. It's one of those things, they're adapting a book and you sort of think, well, in a book you can see why you need that stuff. In a TV drama where you've got to condense it to like the most important stuff, the stuff which really adds to the drama and stuff, the stuff that works thematically, I think you can cut some of that filler out. But the other thing with this episode is that it does become kind of full on generic, over the top, quite sort of cheesy. And it's one where, which I could see in the earlier episodes, but one where the budget, it's almost like they're really showing off their budget and it ends up looking pretty bad. There's some horror style moments in this episode where you think, well, if they just either toned it down or went with practical effects, that would probably look a bit better. But the Nadine plots so far, I'm not really into. Now, one reason is because I don't think Amber Heard is the best actress. I think she lacks any real charisma. I think she's a bit wooden. Obviously, wait and see what happens with Nadine as a character. I think she could be quite interesting. But what happens is the opening scene of the episode is her and some friends, when obviously she's younger, like playing a game of Ouija. They're in like some sort of care home or something like that. And okay, so Ouija board game, obviously they're going to summon some spirits, which happens, and they all freak out, run out of the room. Nadine actually stays, but you're already thinking quite generic horror type tropes. But Nadine, first of all, she keeps this necklace, which we've seen in the previous episode. So she's had this throughout life. up to the point we're at, and this is obviously going to become important when it comes to the Alexandra Skarsgård character, whatever his name, I can't remember his name now, but essentially the opposing version of the Whoopi Goldberg Sister Abigail character, the kind of more darker, sinister guy who's essentially almost representing the devil and evil and getting, people to work for him. In this episode, they're sort of described as like slaves, which I think is quite a good metaphor. But so first hole I have to pick in this is that she keeps the necklace, so that's okay. But she also holds on to the game. She holds on to this game throughout her life. I mean, not throughout because she's quite young, but up to this point, we see her in the present later on, and she's still got the game, and she starts to play it. And you just sort of think, well, if you had this bad experience as a kid with this game, surely that would sort of scare you off the game for life. But oh no, Nadine keeps it with her, which is kind of ridiculous. And I think that's mostly it for her for the episode, apart from at the end you do get this twist. So she starts playing the game, and she goes into like this netherworld where she's visited by the Skarsgård character, who has visited a few people. We see him a fair bit in this episode. He visits this other character who he's trying to like manipulate and mould into his way of thinking. But yeah, we see Nadine visited by him, and what we basically see is that he's planted her as a spy in like the boulder in the camp and stuff. So fair play, that is quite an interesting twist, and I think that there could be some good stuff in there with Nadine and her sort of plot, and maybe wrestling it between the two sides. Although we've kind of seen that before, but there's just some awful cheesy slocky stuff in this episode, especially with the Nadine stuff, because at one point she kind of, it's, well, actually not her. I'll come to that character, but as I said, that's kind of the twist, that she seems to be under the control of the Skarsgård character, and she's working against Sister Abigail and the rest of them. Now there's this other character who's brought into town, and he's basically dumped at the side of the road. His name's Max. We see a bit of his backstory, but he's being hung up on a cross sort of thing. So very religious symbolism. A little on the nose again, but you get what they're going for, and they take him to the hospital, and he's actually been sent as a message from the Skarsgård character. But again, with him, this is when it starts to all get very sort of cheesy and a bit cliche and generic, because at one point Sister Abigail visits him in the hospital, and she comforts him, but asks him for the message, and his eyes go all black, this sort of horror movie trope, and he becomes all possessed and kind of stressed out, and starts speaking in this kind of melodic, sort of malevolent sort of voice. I'll go with malevolent, but it kind of has this cheesy message where he's actually speaking for the Skarsgård character. "I'm sorry to blow your house down," he says at one point. It's really stupid shit. I think this stuff is the weakest we've had, and it does take me out of the episode, whereas the other two episodes there was some pretty good drama. There's not a lot of it in this episode. It does kind of drag, and this sort of stuff really takes centre stage, and some of the stuff with Skarsgård's character talking to other characters in like this in-between type place, he comes to them in their head, a bit like Sister Abigail does. That stuff looks really hokey to me. There's little bits and pieces with Harold and with Franny. We see stuff with them. It cuts back to when they first met Stu on the road, and as we now know, it appears as though Franny is pregnant with Stu's child, or certainly that's what we've been meant to believe, and that's maybe why there's no longer this kind of relationship with Franny and Harold. They seems to be kind of on the outs. We see Harold do some work, but he seems on the outer circle, whereas Franny is in the inner circle now. She's at one point. There's another character which I'll talk about in a moment, but they discuss this decision and this Max has been dumped here, and he's now like the sort of mouthpiece. So they get together as a group to discuss, yeah, the relevance of that, and do we just go with this? Do we just accept it? Then we need to hear this guy and take this stuff seriously. So she's clearly on the inner circle, I think, because she's obviously maybe in a relationship with Stu, whereas Harold seems he works and he does like gardening and stuff, but he seems to be on the outer circle, which makes you wonder if maybe Harold could become a target at some point. But in any case, we see little bits and pieces with Harold, not a great deal, but he does cut back to when Franny and Harold are on the road and heading towards Boulder, and we see Harold leaving messages, or they've been leaving messages just saying who they are and stuff. Which is actually one of the best lines because Harold gets protective when they bump into Stu, and like he sort of holds him up with a gun, and Franny says at one point, well, if we didn't want people to know our identities, then why have we sort of written it on the road everywhere, which is pretty funny and a fair point. But yeah, there's sort of a machismo really from Harold to Stu, whereas Stu's obviously trying to cool the situation, and Franny later apologises. So that's a decent enough scene. Again, it's a scene that maybe could have been cut, but it's again just showing them meeting and the stuff with that and the first meeting, I guess. It does. It really appears as though Franny later gets together with Stu. Highlight of the episode, without doubt, is the Glenn character by Greg Kinnear. Greg Kinnear shows up, so we do have quite a cast. He bumps into Stu at one point, and he is sort of an old-fashioned hippie. He has a dog named Kojak, which I love. But he has some great lines because he's very sort of seasoned and experienced. But at one point when they're getting high together, him and Stu, and they're just talking about their lives, Glenn just says, yeah. When Stu asks him about kids, he says, I never really had time for the little fuckers. Which is just great. And I can relate to that. But obviously Greg Kinnear is fantastic. So I would be more interested if we see more of him in the coming episodes. But he does these paintings, his character, and he has a painting of Sister Abigail, who he's never met. And the other big thing, I think he's heard of her, he mentions her. But the other big thing is he has a painting of Franny, and in the painting she's pregnant, which hasn't happened yet. That's still to come in the future. So that sort of is quite a quirky, interesting thing. But fair to say, Greg Kinnear steals the episode as Glenn, who now appears like he might be brought on board because we see him later in the group when they're discussing the whole Max thing. So there you have it. That's my thoughts on episode 3 of The Stand. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below if you've seen it. I will continue with it for now, even though I wasn't so keen on this episode to see where it leads. But yeah, we'll see. So like and subscribe if you are new to the channel. Also share me out on social media to help me get some more views. and you can ding the bell on YouTube for more content. Thanks and goodbye.